At that time, Cleveland was majority white and did not have a majority African American population at that point. So he had to put together a really diverse coalition to be able to win in a city like that.
Right.
Even though I had the journalistic skills, I was an African American male stepping into a role where there had not been an African American male in that role before. It was just something that clicked. I found what really excited me.
You know, I had these run-ins with Steve Wilson. There was so many run-ins with Steve Wilson, and the guy that was running behind him, you know, Raymond.
A lot of people had run-ins with Steve Wilson.
Welcome back to Casual Conversations with Mario Morrow. This week, we have a very, very, very special guest, my good friend, Chuck Stokes from Channel 7. Spotlight on the news, among other things.
We've become synonymous for better or worse, right?
Welcome to Casual Conversations.
It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Thanks for coming. Now, how long have you actually been in Detroit? I know you're from Cleveland.
Yeah.
And you've been in this market now for...
I've been in Detroit longer than anywhere else I live. So I came here in September of 1981. So that's a long time ago. That's 40 some odd years ago. I had moved around some before then. I was born and raised, as you said, in Cleveland, Ohio. But then I went down south. I was educated at Morehouse College in Atlanta, and then I went up north for graduate school in New York at Columbia University, and then I worked in Nashville, and I worked in Washington, D.C. for a little bit of time when I was in newspaper, brief period of time before I went to television, because the lion's share of my career has always been in television. And then I settled in Detroit. Right. I never thought I'd be here this long, never, but my wife was born and raised here. And we had our kids here.
Right.
And it's a great station. And you at some point, you've got to put some anchors down.
Yeah.
And I remember meeting some of the folks who were correspondents for network. Because originally I thought I wanted to be a network correspondent. And then when I started talking to them, I realized they all had something in common. A real high divorce rate. And they had to keep their bags packed.
Yeah.
And I said, that's not a life for me. For some other people, but that's not what would excite me.
Yeah. Cleveland, that's your start. You come from a political family. A lot of people might not know, but several people do. Your dad was a congressman.
Correct.
And your uncle was the mayor.
That is correct.
Let's talk about that a little bit. How did everybody thought you were going into politics, right?
They thought maybe. I never thought it. It was a wonderful experience, a historic experience. We were just like the average middle-class African-American family growing up in Cleveland. But
average, but wait a minute. Now, your family was in Jet magazine and Ebony like every week.
Yeah, but I mean, before they entered the world of politics and got that recognition, we were just an average family, hardworking family like so many others. My uncle was the real lover of politics, and both my father and my uncle were lawyers by profession. But my uncle knew he wanted to be in politics. He liked the rough, tumble world of politics. And he was a state representative in Ohio first, and then decided to run for mayor, and coincidentally became the first African-American mayor of a major city.
Right.
Dick Hatcher of Gary, Indiana, they were elected the same year in 1967.
Right, and that's before Coleman Young became mayor of Detroit.
It was before Coleman, right. So they sort of paved that way. because at that time, Cleveland was majority white
Right.
and did not have a majority African American population at that point. So he had to put together a really diverse coalition to be able to win in a city like that.
Right.
And so 2 years later, Dad won a congressional seat and became the first African American congressman from the state of Ohio. Dad loved law. He had no interest in politics whatsoever. He would help and support Carl behind the scenes, but he did the legal work along with some other colleagues to reapportion a district in Cleveland, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and they were able to win and show that it had been discriminated against, gerrymandering, and all those things that we hear about in politics. And so when the lines were redrawn, it was very apparent that an African American had a chance of running in that seat
Right.
and winning. And so the question became, okay, now we've got this, who's going to run for the seat? And so people came to Dad and asked him if he would run, and he didn't have any interest at first. And I think Carl was behind it to a great extent because he figured, well, that's a great pipeline. I could be mayor, you could be Congress. Between Washington and Cleveland, we'll have a lot of money coming into the district and to the city of Cleveland. So he had to be sort of, convinced to do it. But then once he got in, both of them were hardworking and bright and intelligent. But once he got in, ironically, he had the longer political career and was in Congress for 30 years, representing the people of Northeast Ohio. Carl did 2 terms for mayor, and at that time, the terms were only 2 years.
Right.
So you spent a year basically being mayor, and the next year you were campaigning.
Right.
And then he got out of that, and he decided he had an offer to go to WNBC in New York and be the first African American male anchor of a major broadcast in New York City. And so he did that. He didn't really have the journalism background,
Right.
But Carl was always willing to try something new and different, and it was another historic feat. Carl loved doing
just like John
type of
Conyers.
things.
If you walk, anywhere in America, any city, they recognize you, especially in the black community.
Right.
You're a walking celebrity.
Right. And at that time, it's important that you say that, when you think about the original group of the Congressional Black Caucus, those 13, is that it was a small group of African Americans. And so they were congressmen and women of their districts. But because there was such a small number of them, African Americans across the nation viewed them as their congressperson, even though they didn't represent their city or their state. And so they took on a national stature, and they would take on issues that affected African Americans, whether you were in Montgomery, Alabama, or you were in Brooklyn, New York. And so their role was much bigger at that time compared to now. You've got umpteen number of African American members of Congress.
There was Shirley Chisholm. There was your dad. There was
Bill Clay in St. Louis.
John Conyers.
Diggs.
That's right.
Here,
Diggs,
Charlie Diggs here, and Nixon.
Adam Clayton Powell.
In Philadelphia.
Maybe.
Adam was right a little bit before them. Dad came in '69. It was Dad, Bill Clay, St. Louis, and Shirley Chisholm. They came in the class of '69, and that was the largest group of African Americans.
These folks were in history books while they were still living.
It was. But Adam Clayton Powell and Conyers were already there, and Diggs were already there. So they really paved the way for Dad and Clay and Chisholm. And of course, Adam was, Adam Clayton Powell was Adam Clayton Powell, brilliant, flamboyant, controversial, all those things wrapped into one. He did it all. He did
a preacher too.
He was a preacher too, with a historic church in New York.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Siblings, brothers, sisters?
I do. I have 4 sisters. 2 younger, 2 older.
So you're
and
like the
I was
spoiled,
smack
yeah.
dab in the middle.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the journalism part of your career actually came from your uncle, right? Or was that did he
No,
kind
not
of?
really. It really was not in the family before them, because the family was always law and education. Mother was an educator. My stepmother was an artist by profession and a professional homemaker. My birth mother was an educator, principal of an elementary school, and Dad and Carl were law. My uncle on my mother's side was a psychologist. So that was there. No one had
So what
gone
pushed
into
you down that path?
You know what happened was I was in college, and I actually thought I wanted to be a lawyer when I first went to Morehouse, but I think that was only because that's all I had been exposed to. And then I got involved with the student newspaper and became editor of the paper, and it was just something that clicked. I found what really excited me. If I walked in as a freshman, that would have been the furthest thing from my mind.
Right.
But by the time I came out as a senior, I knew at that point I wanted to pursue journalism. And I had a professor who I think I had the conversation with, and he was saying, well, what are you going to do after graduation, this, that, and the other? Or this was probably a little bit before graduation, because you had to start applying to different places. And he said, well, have you ever thought about graduate school in journalism? And I said, no, not really. I said, what do you advise? He said, well, why don't you do a little research? So I did some research, and I applied to Columbia University and Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and was fortunate enough to get accepted to both. And then my decision became, I said, okay, where I want to be, New York or Chicago? And Evanston is sort of a little on the suburbs, on the fringe of Chicago. I said, heck, I want to be in New York. And that's really about how the decision became. Right. I knew they were both good schools, having done my research.
They were the best in journalism.
But I just, you're young,
right.
You're 20-something years old, or maybe not even quite 20.
But you wanted to be in the Big Apple.
You said, oh man, they had a chance to be in New York. And so
not far from Harlem, hanging out.
Yeah. And I never looked back.
You've been happily married now for what? How many years?
40 years.
40 years.
I've been married for 40 years. I've been happily married for 40 years.
That's great. So, yeah. Trudy, you guys have 2 children?
We have 2 daughters.
Girls?
Two girls,
who are
Kelly and
grown
Kim.
Now. One's an educator. And
the oldest one, Kelly, is a major gifts officer for the Mayo Clinic. And so she has big high-end clients who enjoy donating thousands of dollars to the Mayo Clinic. Her territory is Michigan, and she's based here. And then my youngest daughter is a PhD student at Wayne State University. She went to Howard for undergrad and for graduate school. Kelly, the oldest daughter, went to George Washington University for undergrad and graduate school. And then Kim taught for about 5 years, a year in New York and then a few years in the Berkeley public school system. And her grade of choice was 3rd grade. But she always wanted to get her PhD, so she's getting her PhD in clinical psychology. So she's in the last year of her 5-year program.
That's
so
great.
she's doing the dissertation now.
And your wife was in journalism as well.
Yes.
She was a reporter, right?
She was, and she was a court reporter in Toledo when I first met her at WTOL, which is a CBS affiliate there. And then after we got married, she said, okay, this is going back and forth between Detroit and Toledo. It's getting a little old. And she started working for what we then called Channel 56, now Detroit Public Television. And she used to do a show there. She did Detroit Black Journal for a while, and then she did a show before then, I think it was called Video Detroit. And But then
So now she's making all the money doing the
well,
freelancing.
when she had the
I see her about town
yeah,
and
she's doing well.
with the camera crews.
When she had the second baby, she said, "Okay, this crazy journalism world is not conducive for hours on being a mother and raising a family." And she wanted to start her own business, so she started a video production business, and she could control her hours a lot better, and she could work from home with it a lot. So she got out of the day-to-day rat race of the journalism business.
I was going to ask, how does a guy of your young age become a distinguished warrior with the Detroit Urban League? I saw this, and I'm like,
first of all, I was kidding in Charles Anderson, the president of the Detroit Urban League. I said, "You've blown my secret now." I said, "You can't even get that until you're quote unquote a senior citizen."
Right.
So I said, anybody who thought I was young now knows I'm not as young as they thought I was. So you do have to be in that senior
That's a great honor.
status.
That's a great honor.
Wonderful honor, and I was quite surprised. You know, I had produced many of them throughout the years because they would rotate them between the different
stations,
television stations, and I was always admired the people that they selected, but I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be selected to be one of them. And what's really exciting is the people I went in with, because they always do about 4 or 5 people.
Right.
And so it was Ike McKinnon and Joanne Watson and Ava DeWalsh. And so it was just a fabulous group of people.
Yeah. So you've been doing Spotlight on the News since Jim Harrington passed you the baton. And how long has that been now?
Since 1994. I think January of 1994. Jim retired at the end of 1993. Jim, as Archer was coming into office,
that's right,
Jim was leaving, and Jim had covered umpteen number of mayors and governors and, you name it, Jim had covered them. And I remember his last show, we had then newly elected Mayor Dennis Archer on.
That's right.
And helped present him a cake and stuff like that. And the other reporters who were on that last show, Mike Gooden, who's now the
Michigan
late Mike
Chronicle,
Gooden.
Mike.
Bill Johnson, who's still with us.
Detroit News.
Probably playing golf right about now in Arizona.
You'll get a call after he watches this. He also became the press secretary to the county exec.
Yes, he did.
Back in the day.
Yes, he did. Yeah. But I think as much as he loved politics, I think he loved golf more.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a serious golfer. And there was somebody else in it may have been Carol Kane. I think it might have been Carol. I think Carol was on that one because she used to do the show a lot. And it was a nice show. We had his family there and stuff. And Jim decided it was time. It was time to retire.
Well, you know when it's time.
I had produced the show
for
maybe about 5-6 years.
Did you know you were the heir apparent?
No, I didn't. I didn't, because Jim retired, and then the discussion became, okay, who's going to take it over now?
This is my audition to take your place.
Great.
I'll say the same thing to Devin when I have him on.
Because I'm like you, Jim. I'm just about at the end of that rope.
All right.
I think they're sick of me after all these years. And Grace Gilchrist and Tom Griesdorf. Grace was not quite general manager yet. She was assistant up under Tom Griesdorf, and they talked, and they said, "Well, you've been producing it." And they said, I had been an on-air reporter before when I was in Nashville, and they said, "You've been on both sides. Why don't you do it?" And so I thought about it, and I said, "Well, what the heck, Right. What I didn't know, Mario, was whether or not the public would accept me in that role and like me, because Jim had done such a great job and people were Jim hosted it for 20 years.
Right.
And people get used to it. It's like putting on your robe on Sunday morning and your house shoes and your coffee. People get comfortable with you. And I also was aware of the fact that even though I had the journalistic skills, I was an African-American male stepping into a role where there had not been an African-American male in that role before, and I didn't know if the public would make that transition. But I felt like if I just did the job, hopefully did it well, did it as diverse as Jim did it, didn't show favoritism any way, shape, or form, know there's a fair forum, everybody, then the public would accept me, and they did.
And they
so
have.
they grew up with me.
Right,
Yeah.
that's true. And I remember everybody respected you and still do. But back in my when I was assistant superintendent for Ken Burnley over communications, I was his PR guy, his spokesperson. I had these run-ins with Steve Wilson. There was so many run-ins with Steve Wilson, and the guy that was running behind him, Raymond.
A lot of people had run-ins with Steve Wilson, which is part of what he wanted.
And actually, and then Ross Jones was like, following behind him, trying to learn the job. So I would call you up, because it was very upsetting to me. It was new to me, and I'm like, this guy, Chuck, what? He said, man, I remember this. You may not. And you said, Mario, the guy's just doing his job. And I said, wow, okay, thanks for all your help.
It wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. He was doing his job. Yeah.
But, it's great to continue to watch you and have you on. And, you said it, but I'll say it again. People respect you.
Thank you.
They continue to watch you. You've got that mild, you're not a gotcha guy,
No.
And people, especially I try to get all my clients on your show because I'm like, well, Chuck's not going to kill you off, and I'll just prepare you for a couple hard questions. He'll get you if you put your foot in your mouth.
Right.
But he'll just ask the questions to get the information out, and we appreciate that a lot. Let's do a rapid fire.
Okay.
All right. Favorite restaurant?
Ooh. As of late, Baba Fair.
Okay.
The East African restaurant on Woodward.
Okay. What's your favorite thing to do?
For fun right now, that's an easy one.
Grandbaby.
The grandbaby is certainly number one. But the close number two that doesn't involve a human being, but it's something that's a hobby, is I started doing ceramics about a year ago. It's fun.
It's relaxing.
It's a great
stimulating
group of people.
For the mind.
It is. When I go in there, I don't think about anything other than the piece that I'm working on and whatever the conversation may be inside among the different artists there.
Favorite Detroit musician?
Oh boy. God, they have souls. Detroit is such a rich history. Favorite Detroit.
Are you a jazz guy?
You mean someone who's currently?
No, it doesn't have to be current. It could be jazz. It could be Earl Clue. It could be whoever.
Well, historically, the Temptations.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
All right. Pistons or Lions?
Right now, Lions.
Okay.
Historically, probably Pistons.
Yeah.
But the Lions are coming back. They came so close last year. I thought it was great that they kept all the coaches together and the key players and got a few more good draft choices. So I don't know. I'm hoping, I'm praying that I want to see the Lions in the Super Bowl, and I want to see the Cleveland Browns, my home team that I grew up on. Even though Lions are number one right now, Browns would be number two.
Yeah.
I'd love to see them in the Super Bowl because neither one team has ever been to the Super Bowl.
Fago or Verner's? Last question.
Verner's.
Okay. Yeah, we're a big Verner's family as well.
Yeah. My grandmother used to fix Verner's with vanilla ice cream. And that was at the float, the Verner's float.
Yep. And I just noticed that your watch is a Detroit Lions watch.
It is. It's really nice. So I'm liking them
right.
Because 10 years ago, I might not have worn this Detroit Lions. People would have talked about me too bad wearing it then.
So you and I belong to a very special bond.
Yes.
Kappa Alpha Psi.
The best bond.
There we go. Now, and we both have legacy. We both have several members of our families. And you have who? Your dad, your brother, your uncle?
My father, Louis Stokes. My uncle, Carl Stokes. My uncle on my mother's brother, and his name is Robert Sharpley. He's now retired psychiatrist, in Florida. For many years, he practiced professionally in the Boston, Massachusetts area. My brother-in-law, who's Alpha chapter, my nephew, my oldest sister's one of her 3 children. He pledged to Case Western Reserve University when he was an undergraduate student there. He now lives in Virginia. And my soon-to-be son-in-law, Dexter Mason, who pledged at University of Michigan.
Right.
So we've got family of Kappas and Deltas.
Okay.
Lots of Deltas.
And
more Deltas in the family than Kappas. So we're close.
We're close. Getting there. Well, you got some babies growing up.
We got some babies growing up. And I got a 2-year-old grandson, so
you already buying future Noop.
We'll see what he does. We'll see. It'll be his choice.
So there's my dad, Wilberforce, my son at DePaul in Chicago, my brother, both my brothers, Ramon Fisk and Andre, Delta Pi, Michigan State. I'm Michigan State. My uncle is also Wilberforce. So, man, we've got, we got it covered. We have our own grand chapter meeting.
Lot of crimson and green
I love
going on.
All right.
It's a great bond.
Yep, yes it is. Listen, man, thank you very much for joining us on
My
Casual
pleasure.
Conversations.
Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
This
started
good,
my
man.
week off great.
Yeah. I'm going to have to send this tape over to your general manager for my audition. As you said, my audition tape.
Deal. Hire him, Mike. Hire him, Mike.
I like that. Thanks again for joining us for Casual Conversations with Mario Morrow and our special guest, Chuck Stokes.
It's been a pleasure.